Welcome back to the Marketing Perspective. Today is an exciting day for a lot of reasons. One of my favorite topics that we're talking about is networking. Why is a marketer talking about networking? Because networking should be in every single marketing plan that you have. It is understood. I don't care if you're B2B, B2C, I don't care what industry, networking should be at the core of everything you do. Why is that important? Because if word of mouth marketing is not at the top of the list, and this coming from a traditional advertiser who makes money when you spend money in advertising, word of mouth marketing needs to be the most important thing. Why? Because it speaks into your internal culture, it speaks into the quality of your product and service, and it also speaks into your sustainable brand growth long term. It is critical. So you've heard me talk about networking before. I believe today I have brought on a very special guest who knows a little bit more than networking than I do. And I'm very excited to bring him into the fray. Before I do that, I want you to understand that networking is so important to me, and it should be important to you. I'm going to ask you to do a little test. In your head, I want you to think about the 5 wealthiest people in the world today. Try to name them. And then name the last 5 Heisman Trophy winners in a row. And then one more. How about the last 5 people that won the Nobel Prize? It's not that easy, right? It's difficult. All right, let's flip the script and do something else. Now think about a teacher or coach that made a significant difference in your life. What about an individual that helped you through a difficult time? A person that appreciated and heard you. Did those faces and names pop up a lot faster than the first round of questions? Of course they did. It's kind of obvious that that would happen. Why? Because real networking is relational. It is not a transaction. We need to understand how to really connect with one another, even if it is just business to business, sales to sales. You are building relationships with these people, and networking is critical to your success. So I hope you're with me on that one, because sometimes I feel like I'm alone on the show. I would like you to chime in. As you know, I always ask if you get a chance to email us or text us or on social media, comment on the show. Let us know what you're thinking, especially after this one. I believe you're going to be quite excited about it. So that was one of my favorite examples. Now I can go on and on regarding the importance of networking today, but you're really not tuning in to hear me talk about networking. I would like to introduce my very special guest. Today, my guest founded BNI in 1985. That's your first hint. He is dubbed the father of modern networking by Forbes and CNN and probably even more. BNI now has 11,000 chapters in 76 countries throughout populated continents around the world. I'll have to ask him, but I believe it's the largest networking organization in the world to date. 15.2 million referrals were generated, amounting to $23 billion. And that might just be this year. We'll find out. He is a New York Times bestseller. He has written 29 books to date. His newest book, by the way, The Third Paradigm, is, I think it's available right now, but we'll find out in a few minutes. He is a columnist for entrepreneur.com. Do you know who I'm talking about yet? Come on, raise your hand. I know you do. He has been a university professor. He's been a guest on numerous TV and radio shows such as CNN, BBC, The Today Show. That one I'm really jealous about, just for the record. NBC, and on and on and on. His big claim to fame, though, is he is an amateur magician, which I really would like to hear more about. And he's also a black belt in karate, so do not mess with him. It is my honor and privilege today to introduce the one and the only Dr. Ivan Misner to you, to our show. Dr. Misner, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be on the show. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And the Today Show was a hoot. Most of the funny stuff that I could tell you, I'd have to do off air. I wouldn't repeat it here, but it was a lot of fun.
I appreciate that, as does my listeners. You know, that takes me to my first point. One of the things we're going to start to talk about is the power of networking. But before we do that, you and I were introduced by a man that we both know, Frank Durafley, who's a friend and longtime colleague of mine. And years ago, I helped, and I was involved with and marketed one of your books, Business, Networking, and Sex. Dot dot dot. Not what you think.
And it was that book that got me on the Today Show, by the way.
Well, that makes sense. Speaking of all the off-color comments, because
Yeah, yeah, right.
I remember watching.
And by the way, all those off-color discussions were done off air, not on
Oh,
air.
thank goodness. But I do remember you being interviewed when you were doing the book tour. And I remember your face getting a little rosier when certain questions would come up. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah, well, Frank and Hazel, who co-authored the book with me, they did kind of go off the rails a little bit in talking about gender, and so that was an interesting book. It's still available on Amazon. We did a survey of 12,000 people, and every topic had three sections: he said, she said, and the survey says. Actually, it started with the survey says. The survey says, and I was the survey says guy. Frank was the he says guy, and Hazel was the she says lady. And so they did it from the perspective of gender, and I did it as best as possible in a neutral way. It was a fun book to do, and they were a blast. And so if somebody wants to see, read a book on, how do you network with, in the context of gender, it's a great book to get. I'll give you, you said earlier you like Cliff Notes. I'll give you the Cliff Notes for the book. Women are more likely to be relational, and men are more likely to be transactional. Men are more likely than women to be transactional. Women are more likely than men to be relational. And the interesting thing was that women generated more business based on the survey of 12,000 people, a higher percentage of business than men did. And they spent less time networking, which was interesting. A little bit less time networking, they got a higher percentage of their business. And when we merged the gender and just looked at relational versus transactional, we found out that it didn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you were more relational, which was a phrase you used in your opening about relationships and networking being relational, if you were more relational in your networking, you were much more likely to generate a higher percentage of business than if you were transactional. Hi, James, my name's Ivan. Let's do business. Going right for the sale.
I use that reference all the time, like when I speak publicly. And I've made the point that men are transactional, women are relational. I will use dating as an example. Women are more relational, right? It's the obvious. Like we're the guy that we hit the women over the head with the cave, with the club, and we drag it to the cave where the woman wants to be relational. It sounds a lot more impressive when it comes from you. And I've been saying it for such a long time. I'm listening to you as if I heard it for the first time just now.
Well, the beauty of that book was that it was backed up by a survey of 12,000 people. So it wasn't just the three of us talking about what we thought. It was based on hard data from men and women, not just in BNI. It was open to the public. So it was a great experience to do that book.
It was even so. I'm a data guy. I love backing things up with data, and it's important. But I think it stands to reason. It just made common sense to me.
Can I give you one other thing we discovered from the book? Because in the data we found, that men and women, there was absolutely a difference, and it was a statistically significant difference, but not a huge mathematical difference. And based on the survey open-ended comments, we came up with the concept that really was the cornerstone of the book, which was the exception becomes the perception. The exception becomes the perception. Meaning, most women, most men, when they went to a networking event, most men behaved themselves. They behaved themselves appropriately, right? But it was a handful that became the perception that women had about going to networking events. And from the male perspective, and this is the data, you guys, don't get mad at me. This is the data. This is what men said. Men were frustrated that women would dress provocatively as a way of, getting attention. This is what came up in the data. So, but the truth is, that's the exception. Most women, my experience, and I've gone to a lot of networking meetings, most women dress totally professional, completely professional. But the exception becomes the perception, and that's what you talk about. And there are, if we can just focus on appropriate relational relationships, appropriate relational interaction, then you're going to have people networking effectively.
That is excellent advice. I appreciate that greatly. I want to get us into what we're talking about regarding the power of networking. And I mentioned how we talked, how you and I met, and how powerful that was, and that was really awesome. Can you, from your perspective as the founder of BNI, can you speak into the power of networking today?
Well, I think networking is more important than ever. You mentioned in the introduction that you're an advertising guy, and this may surprise you, but if you've read my material, it won't. Especially my older material, I believe in advertising. I'm a firm believer in advertising. I think, and it depends on the business you're in. Certain businesses need the advertising more than other businesses, but generally speaking, I'm a firm believer in advertising. I just think that word of mouth is a form of advertising. Networking is a form of advertising, and you need to plan and structure your networking in the same way that you plan and structure your advertising. And so it should be all part of a marketing plan, advertising, social media, um, all the different variations of marketing. And networking should be a piece of that. And you need to plan and structure it the same way you plan and structure your other forms of advertising.
We own an ad agency here, and we actually put networking in the experiential marketing category. And it's just in there with trade shows and everything else that some businesses need to do. But networking is across the board. And I can't count how many times, oh, we don't need to do that. I'm like, we're probably not a fit for each other, because we actually look at their internal culture first. And if I think they can't do good word of mouth marketing, something is wrong. And we usually refer them a business coach before we decide to take them on. So you're right. I agree.
Well, part of the problem is that people don't like to network because they've gone to networking groups that they've been sold to. I mean, the truth is, I started BNI because I went to networking groups, two different kinds of networking groups. One, unbelievably mercenary. Everybody I met was trying to sell to me. I'd leave those meetings feeling like I'd been slimed and I needed to go get a shower. It was just nasty. And then I'd go to these other groups that were totally social. It was happy hour and hors d'oeuvres. Nobody was wearing badges. No, there was no business being done. I didn't like either of those groups. What I wanted was a group that focused on business but wasn't mercenary, and a group that focused on relationships but wasn't totally social. And so what I formed back in 1985 was one group. I didn't have this vision at that moment of 11,100 groups, but um, taking business and relational and merging it with this principal core value of giver's gain, this idea that if I help you, you'll help me, we'll both do better as a result of it. And so most people don't like networking because they don't know how to interact. They've been sold to. It's a skill like anything else. Just like you teach people how to do a good ad, people have to learn how to network effectively. And the problem is we don't teach it in colleges and universities anywhere in the world.
You know, so I've been in BNI for 18 years. And I started in the Hudson Valley when I was in New York. That's where I met Frank Girafoli. And now I'm in Nashville. And in that time frame, I mean, my first 2 years, I'll tell you, my company netted $1.2 million that year. And it was the first year in BNI. And the majority of the money came from BNI. So for a traditional ad agency to make money in a word of mouth marketing organization, BNI had to be doing something right. So I started waving the flag, drinking the Kool-Aid. I was a big fan. And I would tell everybody that BNI works and here's why it works. And I can tell you that I look at BNI like, because I was an AD. I don't know if you knew that. I was Frank's AD in Hudson Valley. And when I
Assistant director, yeah.
yeah, correct. When I read the book, it's perfect on paper. But then you put people in the room and it messes it all up.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I understand. Believe me.
so, and I'm sure you probably, I built this thing and you take it and you don't follow the rules and then you wonder why it's not working correctly. And
Yeah,
the biggest
I get it.
pain, right? when you mentioned before about when you started BNI, and you didn't know it would get to this point, but what did you envision? Because every entrepreneur that I know starts with, here's where it is today, here's where I want to take it. So what did you see back then?
Well, I got there. It just took me about a year to get there because when I started BNI, I started BNI to get referrals from my consulting business. I was a management consultant, and I didn't like the mercenary groups. I didn't like the social groups, so I formed a group that I thought was the kind of network that should exist. And someone came to me, and as you know, James, we take only one person per professional classification. And so she couldn't join because her classification was taken. And she asked me if I would help her open a second group. And I actually said, no, this isn't what I do. I don't run networks. I'm a business consultant. And so she's like, well, this is kind of consulting. You're helping me build my business. I thought, well, that's a stretch, but okay, fine. So we opened a second chapter. Two people came who couldn't join the second group because of a classification conflict. And they said, hey, would you help us open two more groups? And I'm like, no, this isn't what I do. I'm a business consultant. And they talked me into it. And at the end of a year, we had 20 chapters. 20. And I started in January. By December, I always take time off around New Year's to reflect, to look, where do I want to be next year? Where do I want to be in 5 years? How was last year compared to my plan? Well, that year is like, what the heck just happened? This was not in my plan at all. And that was my Brody moment. Okay. Do you remember the movie Jaws? Sheriff Brody, at the end of the movie, is throwing chum out into the ocean. And for the first time, you actually see the shark come out of the water. And it's like he almost has his hand taken off, throwing it out there. And he turns around to the captain. And what's he say? You're going to need a bigger boat, right? That was my Brody moment. And I thought, okay, I'm going to need a bigger boat. This is going to be way bigger than I anticipated. And I started thinking that week, it was December 1985. Why? Why did this take off so well? And that's when it hit me. Like I said earlier, we don't teach this in colleges and universities. It's just not taught. And so people are hungry for networking, but they want to do it right and have a system and a process. They don't want it to be social. They don't want it to be mercenary. And so that was the point at which I then sat down and created a plan to scale the business. And we're working now on 40 consecutive years of growth, year on year on year. Every year, we're at almost 40 years of consecutive growth. Even during COVID, we grew.
Right. And you went mostly online and on
completely. Video. Yeah. I mean, we literally when COVID started, we had 9,800 groups meeting in person every week. Can you imagine moving 9,800 groups from in person every week to online? That was a massive pivot of our organization. But we did it. We pivoted 9,800 groups and we grew that year. We at the end of 2020, we hit the 10,000 chapter mark during the middle of COVID. Well, the middle of COVID. And we've continued to grow since then. Now, since then, we've gone to 68% in person, 16% totally online. And by the way, in 2019, if I'd have said in a few years, 16% of 16% totally online, 16% hybrid. They meet once a month in person, the rest of the month online. If in 2019 I would have said to my group, 1/3 of our organization will not meet in person every week, they'd have thought I was crazy. But COVID, first of all, I knew it was inevitable because of the technology, but COVID expedited that need.
Right.
And so we have gone mostly back to in person, but we have online and hybrid groups. And I think hybrid's the future, to be honest with you.
Really? So a little bit of both because it makes it easier on the individual. I mean, yeah.
It does. Yeah. I mean, you can go to a meeting in your sweatpants wearing, a shirt, and don't ask me to stand up. And it makes it, and you don't have to drive anywhere. And it just makes it easy. But
Yeah.
But then you add to it the need to, and I think meeting someone in person, shaking their hand, looking them into their three-dimensional eyes is more powerful. This is great. This is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. I mean, what if COVID had happened in 1990 instead of
Oh,
2020? We would have had way more businesses go out of business, and we would
correct.
have had way, way more deaths. But the fact that we had the technology to go online was a game changer and a literally a lifesaver and a business saver. And
Right.
we were lucky to be able to pivot during that time.
One of the things I found that BNI taught me. So I opened my business 20 years ago, and I joined BNI a year later. Um, I didn't want to be a business owner. I loved what I did for a living. I was corporate, worked in the city. 9/11 ended my career in New York. My listeners
Mm,
know the story. And it made me an entrepreneur. It kind of forced my hand that year because advertising died in New York for almost 2 years after
mm,
9/11. So here I am, a business owner. I didn't know all the things I didn't know. And I was a really good consultant, but I didn't realize I was good at sales because I was a good consultant.
mm.
I don't sell. It was funny. It was Frank, who was my consultant at the time, who would say, well, do you go in front of the person and you ask questions? Yes. He goes, do you take that information and come back with a proposal? Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
it's discovery. He goes, uh-huh. Do they get a signature? I went, well, yes. He goes, uh-huh. He goes, you're in sales.
yeah,
And he
you're in
said,
sales, but you do
that's
it.
right.
You do consultative sales. You're
Correct.
helping to solve somebody's problem rather than let me sell you this widget.
Correct. So I was always natural at it. BNI definitely honed my skills. It made me a better public speaker. It educated me on really right and wrong when it comes to networking. And my biggest pet peeve as a networker now, as a BNI, or more importantly, is I can see a bad networker coming from a mile away. I guarantee that person just going to walk up to me, barely introduce themselves, not ask me any questions, hand me their card, give me their pitch. I'm like, why would I want this information? I know nothing about you. You could care less about me. I want to know from you, from we'll say the horse's mouth, uh, what do you think the core strengths are of a great networker?
Well, I think there are a number of ways that one can be great at networking, and let's take it from the perspective of introvert versus extrovert. There's an assumption that an extrovert is a natural networker. I would confront that assumption. Um, Extroverts are great at introducing themselves. They have no problem talking to people. They'll walk up, they'll introduce themselves. But what's their favorite subject?
Them.
Themselves. That's right. And so an
I wanted to
extrovert
say, I'm sorry, what did you say?
yeah, I mean, the extroverts love talking about themselves, and there's
Right,
nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But if you want to be good at networking, a good networker has two ears and one mouth and should use them both proportionally. It's almost like an interviewer, a great interviewer. You're interviewing me. You're asking me a question. What are you letting me do? You're letting me elaborate.
right.
That's what a great networker does. A great networker asks a question and lets the person elaborate. So extroverts are great at meeting people, but they have to learn how to shut up and ask
So
questions.
listening.
They ask questions and listen, right?
Mhm.
Ask something, then pay attention. Ask something else, then pay attention. Now, introverts, they assume that they're not good at networking because they have a hard time meeting people. But I would argue that they really can be very good at networking because they're great listeners. What they have to learn to do is to meet people. And there are techniques that I've talked about in many of my books about how does an introvert meet people. But once they meet them, they're really good at building a connection because they'll ask a question and they'll listen. So the bottom line is both have strengths and weaknesses. You kind of have to know which one you are, an introvert or an extrovert, and then learn how to take that strength you have, use it, and then that weakness you have and develop a skill set in that weakness that you have. And if you can do that effectively, you'll be very good at networking.
That's great. Do you see, other than listening, do you see any other blind spots that a networker could have?
Yeah, I think most networkers use networking as a face-to-face cold calling event, which you basically said somebody comes up, hands you a card, and wants to sell you something. I did an event in London years ago, and I asked everybody. There's about 900 people there. I said, "How many of you are here today?" It wasn't a BNI event. I was brought in as a keynote speaker, and I was towards the end. I watched everybody networking, and I said, "How many of you are here today hoping to maybe, just possibly sell something?" James, 900 people raised their hands. The entire room raised their hand. Like, great, that's fine, super. I said, how many of you are here today? Second question. How many of you are here today hoping to, maybe buy something? Nobody raised their hands. Not one single person. This is what I call the networking disconnect. People show up at networking events wanting to sell, but nobody's there to buy. So why go? Here's why. And this is you asked for an important concept. This is the concept. Go to networking events to work through the VCP process: visibility, credibility, profitability. You've been in BNI a long time. You know this. Many of your listeners may not. The first, you have to be visible. People have to know who you are and what you do. And once they know who you are and what you do, then you got to move to credibility. And that's the one that takes the most time, where they, really get to trust you, become credible. They know who you are, they know what you do, and they know you're good at it because you build a good reputation. That's the second phase. The third phase is profitability. And it's not just profitability where somebody's buying your product or service, it's profitability where someone is referring you to someone else, because this is a referral process. So first you be visible, then you establish credibility, then it leads to profitability. What tends to happen is that people try to jump over visibility, over credibility, and get right to profitability. And it was in the gender book, the Business Networking and Sex book, that we came up with this phrase called premature solicitation, which you don't want to say fast 3 times; it'll get you in trouble. Um, where you just jump over and you try to get right to profitability, and that doesn't work in networking or other things. It definitely doesn't work in networking.
So when a networker does all the right things, if they're really drinking the
No,
Kool-Aid
don't
kind
say
of a thing,
drinking the Kool-Aid, because that's a cult. So, okay, so the word cult,
it's a cult.
yeah, the word cult. First of all, BNI is not a cult. If
Nope,
BNI were a cult, everyone would do what I tell them to do, and they don't. I
they don't.
try, but they don't.
They don't.
But a cult leads by fear and intimidation. We lead by support and giving.
That's right.
And the word cult is a form of the word culture. And so I think culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is the secret sauce for a successful organization. And so I love the culture that we've created of giving. And that's really the way I would describe it, rather than the Kool-Aid.
When I hear people say the word cult, usually they're the ones that are trying to do their own thing and do it just a little bit differently and take your model, but tweak it just enough to not get slapped. So, yeah, I think it's an incredible organization. Uh, um, so, what would they expect from the outcome? What when a good networker is really doing their job? I'm not saying mathematically. I just mean what would they eventually start seeing if they're doing a really good job at networking?
Well, the first thing if they're doing a really good job, they're doing really good weekly presentations. Let's take it in a BNI context where we're meeting every week, or a group like BNI where they're meeting every week and they're doing presentations. But the thing is, you have to remember that you're not trying to close a sale in these weekly presentations. You're trying to train a sales force. You're teaching people how to refer you. So if you're doing that and you're doing one-to-ones are really important. And we've got data on this that shows that you can actually double the amount of business you generate by doing more one-to-ones with people in a networking group, because it's that building, it's that relationship building. So, and we have hard data on this. It was a study that was done in Europe in BNI, and we found that people who did 4 one-to-ones a month versus one-to-one a month actually receive twice as much business. I mean, come on, think about it. Would you like to get 100% more business if you just do one meeting a week? Yeah, I would. So, it's one of the things. So if you're doing all the right things, you should be generating a fair amount of business. But remember this: the credibility takes time. Networking is a marathon, not a sprint. And so, in a number of my books, and I know you've seen this, we have what we call the time confidence curve. That it doesn't matter what business you're in, it takes a certain amount of time before people have confidence in your ability to provide a quality product or service. And your business determines the amount of time to some extent. For example, a florist, the time confidence curve is quick, right? You hit that confidence level pretty quick. A printer might be a little higher. A real estate agent higher. A financial planner investing somebody's retirement income is at the top of the scale. So you have to think about what business you're in and understand the time confidence curve as it relates to your business, and then work towards achieving credibility at that right time confidence curve where you're generating enough business to really make the networking worthwhile. Remembering that you still have to advertise. There's nothing wrong with advertising. I'm a fan.
Preach it.
Yes. And by the way, and this isn't new stuff. This isn't new stuff, and this isn't just because I'm on your show. You can go back to my book that I wrote in 1994 called The World's Best Known Marketing Secret. And you will see in that book, it's now in its fourth edition, but if you went back to the first edition written in 1994, you would see a section on it where it says advertising is important for a successful business, and word of mouth is a form of advertising. And in the same way that you do traditional advertising, you should also do word of mouth advertising. But I've been saying this literally for 30 years.
And we don't even preach to some industries, like business to business focus. They don't really need to advertise as much. It's more marketing. And there's a difference between advertising and marketing. It's more of a B2C kind of thing that they would need to really advertise. And right now what's going on, I think this is very timely, which is why I like that we were able to get it in now, so that this will launch in mid-September, by the way. Consumer confidence is down out there for 20 million reasons that are going on. Right. Yeah. Right. So with that happening, people are rolling quarters a little bit more. And I'm seeing that people are not making adjustments in their marketing effort or their networking effort. And going back to your VCP principle, which is very true, they are trying to jump the gun and get right to profitability. New people are coming in and they're viewing their chapter or even a different networking organization as, oh, if I don't make money in like 5 minutes, I'm leaving. Well, what did you bring? What did you bring to the table? Are you helping others? Are you listening? Are you taking part? Are you building relationship? So when I say those things, it's easier when everything is great out there, but when it's not great, people get a little antsy. So I know that you see it statistically. You see that there's transition that happens sometimes in BNI, and some of those people that are just takers aren't a fit in down economies because they just need to take.
Well, they're not a fit in down economies or up economies, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but they can be under the radar a lot more in a good economy. It'll be a better perception for them.
So you got to set a baseline for people and say, look, networking is a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to get business overnight. It takes time. And here's the analogy I give. Okay, so let's say you plant an orange tree, brand new, little orange sapling, right? You plant it, and you water it and you care for it for a year. Are you going to get any oranges?
Nope.
No. I mean, let's say it's even a pretty big. It's a pretty big plant. Nope. After a year, you're not going to get anything, right? So, would anyone in their right mind grab the tree, yank it out, and say, "Well, it's not growing here, so I'm gonna go plant it over here and water it for another year."
That's a great analogy.
And see if any oranges come up in the second year. And of course they won't. And it's like, well, it can't, maybe this is a bad location. So I'm going to rip it out by the roots over here. And I'm going to put it over here. That's so incredibly obvious that you would not do that. But we do that with networking groups. You join an organization, you're in for a year, you're just the fruit is just beginning to kind of slightly emerge. And then it's not enough and you tear it out by the roots and You plant it somewhere else. It's a really bad idea. It takes time. I've got this one, and I'm sure you've seen it on BNI podcast. I've got this photograph when we used to have referral slips, actual referral slips. Now it's
I
all
miss the
online.
referral
I
slips.
do
I miss.
too. I do too. I know. So, but he was in for 6 years. He was a guy in Portugal, and there's a photograph on one of the podcasts of the number of referral slips he got the first year, and then the second year, and then the third year, and then the fourth year, and then the fifth year, and then the sixth year. And he's got it just in this line. They're stacked up side by side. He said, it took time. The first year paid for my dues and my time. The second year was great. The sixth year, I'd be insane to leave. It takes time to build those kinds of relationships. But
That's right.
let's go back. Networking is more about farming than it is about hunting, right? Well, if you're hunting, you basically eat what you kill that day. But if you're farming, you get this harvest. You could go on vacation. You could be gone for a week, and it's still out there growing. Referrals are showing up to your office, even if you're not there. That's the beauty of a powerful network. But I'm singing to the choir. You know that.
Oh, that's you know what? For listeners today, that is a very powerful point. I agree. When you gave the orange tree analogy, I really thought because you need two trees to germinate, and they have to be male female. Like, same thing with apple trees.
Great point.
Yep. So you can't do it alone.
No.
It takes two people. And in networking, it's the same thing. You can't. Some people come in, they just sit and wait to receive, and they're not going to get anything until they start building those relationships. So
I got a podcast, and I don't know what number it is, BNI podcast, and I've written about it on my blog, a true story about this gentleman in the Midwest who won year after year. He won for the best ears of corn. He would just grow these amazing ears of corn. And this was decades ago, before genetically modified corn. That he would grow these great ears of corn. And a reporter went to him and asked him, how do you do this? Every year, you have these great harvests of this immense corn. And he said, well, what I do is I give the seeds to my best corn. I plant seeds in my fields, but I also give it to my neighbors. And the guy says, why would you do that? He said, because they germinate each other. Right. And so if my neighbors have lousy corn, I'm not going to have award-winning corn. For me to have award-winning corn, I need my neighbors to have really good corn. And so he actually shared his seeds with neighbors so he could be incredibly successful. He helped his neighbors be successful. And if that isn't the best example of networking, I don't know what is. And that was the point that I think you were making.
It is, and that's an excellent point. My favorite thing to do is to put two people in the room together and get out of the way.
Yeah.
And let them see value in one another. And I love being able to do that. Will it come back? Somehow, some way it does eventually.
Yeah, but one way or another. And it comes back sometimes in ways you would have never expected.
That's right. Agreed. I'll
tell you a quick story. If you got the time, I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah, please.
I call it the butterfly effect of networking. And the butterfly effect is part of chaos theory, which is a division of mathematics. And it says that the flapping of the wings of a butterfly changes some minute thing in the weather, which is just some minute thing in the air that changes something else, that changes something else, that changes something else, that changes the weather. Okay? That's the concept of chaos theory. And the butterfly effect is part of that. And I once was on Necker Island in the Caribbean, and I had to write an article for entrepreneur.com that day, and I had no idea what I was going to write, and I was really struggling. And the only place that I had internet, this was back in 2007, the only place there was internet was in the great room on Necker Island. And up walks Sir Richard Branson of Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Galactic, Virgin Voyages, everything, right? Virgin everything. And he walks up and he says, so what are you doing? I said, well, I've got an article, deadline's today, I got to send this article in. And this is the only place where internet, back in 2007. he said, "Oh, listen, I get it. Deadlines are important, but when you're done, we're all down by the pool at the ocean and on the ocean. Come on down and join us. Let's have some fun. And if I don't see you down there, sit next to me at lunch and tell me more about this networking thing that you do." And he walked off, and I remember James sitting there going, "Dang, how did I get here? How did I get here where this billionaire comes up to me and says, 'Hey, you want to come out and play?' And if I don't if I don't see you out there, sit next to me in the lunch room and let's talk, right?" How did that happen? And and that's when my article came to me because I couldn't think of what to write. And I wrote about the butterfly effect of networking. Because to take it back to your statement, you never know where an introduction can lead you. I got on Necker Island. Necker Island, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is Richard Branson's private island in the Caribbean. Okay. I got onto Necker Island because of an introduction 2.5 years earlier. Not an introduction to a CEO, not an introduction to a multimillionaire, an introduction to a solopreneur life coach. And that introduction led to another introduction and then to another one, and then to another. And this is the butterfly effect, right? It was the ripple effect. One after, and it took 2.5 years. And 2.5 years later, someone said, "Hey, there's a seminar going on Necker Island. You're invited if you'd like to come with your wife." And we went. And I remember I called, the woman's name was Kim. I called Kim, and we'd kind of stayed in touch over the 2.5 years. But I called Kim and I said, "Kim, I want to personally thank you for introducing me to Richard Branson." And I remember Kim on the phone going, "Ivan, this is Kim George. I don't know Richard Branson." I'm like, "Well, let me tell you a story, Kim." And I tell her how the introduction to her led to something that led to. So your point is so relevant to networking that you never know who someone knows, but more importantly, than who they know, and then and it's all about building relationships along the way. If it was just a transaction, it would have never led to another introduction and another introduction and another introduction. They were all relationships that led to another introduction and another introduction. And that's the key to networking.
I agree. A couple of weeks ago, one of my chapter members, because I announced that you and I were going to get to speak, "Oh my gosh, how did you get Dr. Ivan Misner on your show?" I said, "I asked. I just asked. We know each other through this, and to your butterfly effect, it was 3 to 4 different steps." And when you mentioned Richard Branson, by the way, do you happen to know the name Dinah Liversledge? She's a British woman.
Yeah, Diane,
Public speaker.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know who you're referring to. Yes, I do know her.
Her story refers to Richard Branson.
Yeah, wasn't that the
She was in a wheelchair.
Story? Yeah.
Yes. Well, I was speaking at an event, and she went on before I did. And she told her story, and here she is standing and doing her thing. And then she dropped the mic that she had been in a wheelchair for years. And then she talks about Richard Branson. I said, I have to follow that? It's like, that sucks. So I had to somehow spin the power of brand and how Richard Branson literally personally took care of the situation for her because it was such a bad story that he solved the problem.
That is a great story. And I'll tell you, it was I was back on Necker Island back in 2010. It was my second visit. I told him that story.
Did he remember?
I told him I know the woman who he, for those of you who don't know, Diane's, I think it's Diane, right? Her wheelchair.
It's Dinah, Dinah.
Dinah, okay. So her wheelchair was broken on a Virgin Atlantic flight and was unusable. And she filed a complaint, and rather than the customer service, correct me if I'm wrong here, James, but rather than customer service reaching out to her, Branson reached out to her and replaced it with a better wheelchair than what she had. And she was just so unbelievably impressed. And I said, look, I know the woman who you did this for. And he's like, oh my goodness. I remember that. And he said, you know her? I'm like, yeah, I know her. And let me tell you something. She's going all around the world telling that story. And he's like, well, that's very nice of her. I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because Virgin needs to do a good job for its customers. But I'm really glad that she is happy.
Yeah, the prelude to that was two other airlines did not do the right thing. It happened to her before, and she used to be a very overweight woman. Oh, it was a horrible story. And then finally, Virgin did do the right thing. And it turns out at the time, she used to travel the world because she worked for Pfizer back then. And I'm not saying names because I want them to sponsor us at all. They
Even if they
wound
were
up, she was,
willing, you'd be okay.
but I'd be okay. She did she chose what airlines the corporation used. So she switched their
Nice.
account to Virgin.
Nice. All
So
right.
he
Next
probably
time
didn't
I
even
see
know.
Richard, I'll tell him that add on. I didn't know that.
Yes, he got the entire account, just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
So of course I had to get on and speak after that, which that was a blast. But anyway, I did not get to go to Nicker Island. Just saying,
Oh, Neckar's an amazing place. I've been there 5 times now.
must be beautiful.
It is beautiful. And let me tell you something. Branson's an interesting guy. His ego does not enter the room before he does, which, is a little unusual for a billionaire. He's very easy to talk to. And here's the thing. So I love that. But here's what I love even more. He treats his staff like he treats millionaires. Okay. I mean, he talks to his staff like he talks to millionaires. He doesn't talk down to them. He treats them professionally. And on one of my trips, he had to leave the island for a day on some business trip, just for one day. Boom, gone. And so I had his staff around, and I'm like, okay, talk to me. How is he really to work for? Really? I mean, come on, tell me. And to an employee, they're like, he's fantastic. We love working here. He's amazing to work. He has expectations. He wants things done, but he's really reasonable and he's friendly and he's fun and he's interesting. We love working here. Every single employee, in their own way, shared how much they loved working for Richard. And I just love that's the kind of guy that I want to be around. I want to be around really successful people who treat people really well.
People that are authentic too.
Yeah. Well,
It's
you
hard
can
to
be
find
an
that.
authentic a-hole.
I guess you could, yeah.
I've met those. I've met those. The people whose egos enter the room before they do, and they're very authentic about that. That's who they are. And to be authentically kind. So one of the trips we took to Necker, we did this is crazy, a bar hopping trip by boat to these bars. Some of them were on other boats, right? And in one of the locations, I forget the location, but one of the locations literally had a metal sign up in their bar because Branson would drop in once or twice a month. He would just drop into this. It was a dive bar, right, in the Caribbean, on the ocean, on the water. It had a sign that said, "Be nice like Branson." And if that doesn't tell you who he is as a person, I don't know what does. So why is this important to everyone who's listening? Humble people don't think less of themselves. They just think of themselves less. I'm going to repeat that. Humble people don't think less of themselves. They just think of themselves less. And if you want to be great at building relationships and at networking effectively, humility goes a long way.
Oh my, that's the nugget of the day without a doubt. Thank you for sharing that. That was awesome. I don't want to abuse your time. I have a couple of more quick questions just to touch on. Do you happen to have like your favorite testimonial or story regarding networking and BNI? Is there one that stands out for you?
Well, there is one. I'll give you the short version of it. It's incredibly touching to me, and it has nothing to do with business. It has nothing to do with referrals, and we generate a lot of referrals. You mentioned 15 million referrals, 23 billion. I just saw the numbers yesterday. The previous 12 months from yesterday, 12 months ago, we did 24 billion in thank you for closed business. That's how much business we generated for our members.
Right. And that's only recorded.
Yeah, that's what's recorded by members.
Right. And I say that. So if you're listening and you don't know about BNI, it's recorded. So some members don't record their stuff. So that's only the stuff that's actually tracked it on records.
And here's what I love about this. If you take a look at the United Nations estimates of GDP, gross domestic product, there are actually 100 countries in the world with a lower GDP than what BNI generated for its members in the previous 12 months. That blows my mind. That absolutely blows my mind. So we do a lot of business, but my favorite story actually has nothing to do with business. It's a member who had a hard time just standing up and speaking. He said it would take all my effort, and he was in a chapter that they would do 60-second weekly presentations. Some chapters do less because they're bigger groups, and he had 60 seconds. He said it took all my energy, all my emotional power to do 20 seconds of my 60 seconds because I just I couldn't speak in front of people. And he said I got better and better and better, and my wife and I decided that we were going to adopt some twin boys, fraternal twin boys from Kazakhstan, and the process took a year. And they were toddlers. These boys, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, something like that. I don't know if that's a toddler or not, but they're around that age. And they found out about halfway through, 6 months through, that one of them had a heart condition and would not survive more than a couple more months, 3 months at the most. But it took another 6 months to get to be able to complete the adoption. And so the member said, he flew to Kazakhstan and he talked to the attorney. He said, let's see if the judge will approve the adoption earlier. And the attorney said, the judge isn't going to do it. They don't do it. It's a year. It takes a year at best, maybe 11 months, but it's often 13, 14 months. It takes a year. And he said, well, let's see what we can do. And so they went to the judge. And here's a guy who, like 2 years earlier, couldn't stand up in front of people he knew and do a presentation. And he stood up in front of a judge in a different country, in a different language with a translator. He stood up and he started, well, first of all, he asked the attorney, can I speak to the judge? And the attorney said, well, no, the attorneys only speak to the judge. And he said, well, we just ask him. And so he asked him, and the judge said, yes, fine. And so through a translator, he talks to the judge, and he literally started with his weekly presentation. It was like, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is how I'm able to take care of these children. And he then did this really heartfelt thing with the judge where, this young boy isn't going to make it. Here's, you've seen the medical papers. He's not going to make it another 3 months. I have the ability to get him heart surgery and he can survive. And his life is in your hands. And the judge, took the gavel and went, approved. And he took the kids.
On the spot? Wow.
On the spot.
Wow. That's powerful. It's hard. And
powerful.
If you didn't have that background, if you didn't have the ability to stand there and do that, it may not have happened, right?
Yeah. And, to me, you see all this business that's generated in BNI and how people they've raised families, they have employees, they've had success. But that story to me is so emotionally powerful that someone who couldn't stand up in front of people he knew just a couple of years earlier could stand up in front of a judge in another country and convince a judge to do something that was just never done was a testament to the human spirit that takes place in a good BNI group where people are supportive. Because do you think he could have done that if he was in a chapter where the members were not supportive of him? His first year, he could barely talk, but they were there to coach him and help him and support him. And he got better and better and better. Because he got better, he was able to do that. I mean, it just all adds up. It's this ripple effect of giver's gain.
I'm seeing more and more. I'm seeing businesses get very self-focused, and I don't know if it's the market that I'm in right now or the climate. I'm not sure, but I know that I preach about we have to come together as businesses to be able to work off of each other and to help one another, not look at each other as competition, and really help each other grow. I'm involved in economic development in the county that I'm in, and I talk about it there. And I say we have to come together. We have to be as one, especially in down economies. If that's really what we're about to look at, I said this is the time to come together, because if we don't, a lot of businesses are going to go under. Historically, I've seen that.
And we live in a very divisive time, so
correct.
it's very
Yeah,
difficult to get that to happen.
being pulled apart. I don't want,
Yeah.
we don't want to go there, but we are divided in a sense. And I said we have to come back together as businesses, especially small business. I mean, small businesses, anybody with 200 or less employees, by definition, that's a lot of businesses in our country. My favorite. I want to give you my favorite part because I have a question about this. But what I love about BNI ultimately is people from other groups can reach out to you and you can reach out to them and say we're like brethren in a sense, and let's open the door and have a conversation, and we both understand that it's about building a relationship. Some people don't, and they just use it as a sales tool, and I'm sure that's a pet peeve of yours. But in general, I love being able to talk to people around the world. I have business relationships in other countries because we had been talking, and little by little we became friendly, and little by little we became referral partners or vendors to one another. It's a very powerful tool, and it's underestimated.
So people who are listening may not understand how that happens because we have 11,100 plus groups, but we have a platform called BNI Connect, which is sort of like LinkedIn but online. LinkedIn for BNI, and so only BNI members. It's called a walled garden. Only BNI members get to participate, and so you can network with people anywhere in the world who are part of BNI. We may think, well, that's so what? Well, think about this: if you were going to Nashville, if someone were going to Nashville, and you didn't know anyone in Nashville, and you got on LinkedIn and you found people in Nashville and said, "Hey, I'm coming to Nashville. Would you introduce me around?" They're like, "Who are you?" What? No. But if you reached out to somebody if a member reached out to you, James, or to other people in Nashville and said, "Hey, I'm from the United Kingdom or I'm from Australia or Malaysia and I'm coming to Nashville. Can I visit your chapter? Would you introduce me to some people?" BNI members roll out the red carpet. So this ability to connect online, all 327,000 BNI members online, is a very powerful tool that no one has. BNI is the largest networking organization in the world, and it's for reasons like this that we have been able to be the 600-pound gorilla in this field.
I'll give you the short version. When I first got to Nashville, so I'm in business 20 years, but 5 years ago we came to Nashville. A big F4 tornado came through here. It was bad. So it took me a hot minute. I'll wait and not open my office yet. And then right after that, COVID started. And my number one way to grow business is speaking engagements, by the way. So it cut my knees out from under me for quite a bit. So I was in several different types of networking groups, and they all have their place and all that kind of stuff. I never felt accepted in a new market. And I'm new here, and I'm an Italian kid from Brooklyn, so anybody just thought, yeah, probably at one point, So when I got here, it was very challenging for me until I walked into a BNI room. And then all of a sudden I felt a little bit like home.
Yeah.
This one group was a little cliquish, which I
yeah. Isn't it interesting how different groups of people,
Yes.
Yeah.
That goes back to how the BNI, I call it the BNI Bible, is perfect.
You got to follow the program, and part of the program is really being there for each other and supporting each other.
Correct. I totally agree. Ivan, I can't tell you, you have created something that no one can replicate, and as many have tried, and I've witnessed it on numerous occasions. And it's a very powerful tool that I know small businesses should be utilizing if they're not. I want to wrap up today. Is there anything on the horizon for BNI? Like, is there a new toy, a new tool? Power teams is a really big topic. We didn't even go there. Is there something new coming that you can share?
Well, we are continuing to develop BNI Connect and BNI Web. I think more and more you're going to see the program be a platform-oriented program where we're, doing chapters that are hybrid kinds of groups, and the education on business builders is going to continue. But the core business is relationships, and your network is a beacon of hope in a sea of fear. We live in a crazy world, but your network, that's your beacon of hope. And in BNI, that beacon is about givers gain. And in any good network, that's what it should be about. And to me, it's more than a phrase, it's a way of living one's life. It's a perspective to view and interact with the world. It's an attitude, not an expectation. And when it's applied properly, it'll change your life. And when it changes enough lives, it'll change the world. And that's what we're trying to do, is change the way the world does business through this philosophy of givers gain.
One business at a time.
One business at a time. Hey, for your listeners, anyone that wants to check out BNI, go to bni.com, or my blog, all free stuff, ivanmisner.com. A lot of free information going back to 2007 on my blog.
Can they get to the podcast there as well?
No, the podcast is bnipodcast.com. BNI podcast is very BNI centric. So for your listeners, you may or may not be interested in that. Unless you're a BNI member, then you definitely are interested in that. Otherwise, I'd go to ivanmisner.com, which is more general. It's not just about BNI. It's about networking, and it's about business, and it's about scaling a business, many other topics.
Okay. Well, I would not be a shameless marketer if I didn't plug a couple of things that you're doing. So one of the things I know that's up and coming, the BNI Global Convention for 2024, is going to be in Hawaii. I feel so bad for you, on November 13th through the 16th. And if you happen to need a speaker.
Do you know how often I get out of the hotel at these conventions?
Not you don't get to go play?
You don't? No, not when the convention's over. It's 7 days of 12-hour days. Which,
wow.
Look, I could be digging ditches. This is way easier. But,
that's right.
But I am going to take a week off after the
window. That's right. I was going to mention, if you need a keynote or bag carrier, I'm happy to jump on board. I love Hawaii.
It is open to the public. People are welcome to come to the BNI convention in Hawaii, in Oahu.
Non-members can go to a convention?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. That's awesome.
BNI members, definitely, and directors, of course. We're expecting over 2,500 people.
Okay, and that's the global convention. So
the global convention. And what's great about going to a global BNI convention is it's like going to a United Nations event where all the countries love each other.
Right.
It's amazing. Cool. You have these flags from all over the world, these different languages and the accents. It's an incredible experience. It's a humbling experience to me to go there and see what this has become. Anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. When is the next national convention? I don't think I have that.
The next U.S. convention, I think, is in April, May, or June of 2025. I don't know which month, and it's in Houston, Texas. I'm in Austin.
Okay.
This is my home office in Austin, Texas, so it's about 3 hours from where I live, and it's sometime after April.
Is that Big Sur? Are you in Big Sur?
Austin? No.
Yeah.
I'm by Lake Austin.
Oh, okay. Got it. It's funny, Houston, my only experience in Houston, I produced all the Monica Muffler commercials with George Foreman. Mr. Foreman only stayed in Houston. So we had to always go to him. And quick short story, I was on the back of a truck. We were doing production and we were shooting all these commercials. And I actually asked him the question that everybody asks him: why does he call all his kids George, Georgetta, Georgina? And I thought I was going to get, he legally can't touch me, but you never know. And he said, because it's all I have to give them. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, because I worked really hard to make my name mean something. Because in that industry, boxers get abused and people steal their money and all. He said it was very difficult to go. It wasn't not just being the athlete I had to be, but I had to build a brand. And he used the term, I didn't use it. And he said, and that at that time, this is a while back, he was awarded the George Foreman Grill, which was $135 million just for his name.
Yeah, well, as I recall, and I could be wrong, he didn't get that up front.
No,
It ended up happening afterwards, and it was just a
correct.
little thing that he put his name to that turned into something huge.
Correct. And but
Yeah, good for him.
it was a
Good
very
for him. I
powerful
love stories like that because you know so many sports people that just get off the rails, and
and go
I'm
the wrong
proud of
direction.
people like
Right.
him.
He's a pastor in Houston. And the only thing about Houston, you're going to be there for what, 3 or 4 days when you do it. It's
Oh no,
wait 5 minutes, the weather will
we
change.
what's that?
Wait 5 minutes and the weather will change.
Oh yeah. I live in Austin, which isn't too different from Houston. So yeah, the weather, and we have real
Yeah, it's a
rain
little better.
here. Not like California. I grew
Austin's
up
a
in
little bit like
California.
Nashville, I
What's that?
find. Austin is a little bit like Nashville, I find.
Well, downtown is, yeah, because
Yeah, personality.
it's a live music
Yeah.
center for Texas, and it's amazing. But I'm about 40 minutes. I live on 10 acres by Lake Austin. Very
Yeah.
quiet,
Weren't
really nice.
you were in Colorado at one point, no?
No, California. I grew up
California.
in California. I lived there most of my life and left about
Okay.
12 years ago.
Okay.
And I don't want
I
to talk about
misunderstood.
why. I was happy to leave California.
Oh, sorry. Look at me bringing
No,
it
it's
up
good.
right,
I'm happy to be in Texas. Texas is
and
wonderful.
dropping the mic.
And and I loved California when I lived there. I grew up there. I moved from Pittsburgh. It's a true story. I haven't said this much on radio shows or podcasts. I moved to South Central LA, just right around South Central LA, in the early '60s, and I lived there for about a year. And that was a real interesting experience for me as a young boy. Yeah,
Eye-opening.
it was very eye-opening. And then we moved to Azusa, which was at least a fair amount better than South Central.
Yeah, at
So I
least
grew
you
up in Southern
live.
California in very humble environment.
Got it. So the last thing would be to, I
Matter of
want to
fact,
talk about,
as a matter of fact, my office, this office, which it goes back a little further. There's a storage room back there. Is 300 square feet smaller than the house I grew up in.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. It's amazing. And well, 29 books later, I'm sure you had a few dollars to have 300 square foot of an office space.
Yeah, a little bit, and you know, real estate. Honestly, I would urge people, you know, as they start to make money, buy real estate, particularly commercial properties. I've been investing in real estate for 45 years, and um,
Smart.
yeah, long term investments in real estate's been very, very good to me.
Yeah, I'm getting to it too late. I wish I'd done it a long
It's
time
never
ago,
too
but
late. It's never too late.
well, I'm doing it. So the book that I wanted to ask you about was the new one that you have out, The Third Paradigm.
Yeah,
And I read a paragraph that your assistant sent me. It was sounds fascinating,
yeah. This is the
but
book.
I thank you. I read more to learn than to enjoy today. I just not enough hours in the day, and I have 3 kids, and I own a business. But give me the cliff notes of what's the secret sauce of the third
Well,
paradigm.
there's a couple of things, and I'd recommend if you read nothing else, there is a section in every chapter I'd urge you to read. But let me give you the cliff notes on the book, and then I'll tell you what sections to read. The first paradigm is about competition, and it's the turn of the century from the 1900s to from the 1800s to the 1900s, where it's all about productivity and competition. The Frederick Taylor, the Galbraiths, the Gants, and it was all about productivity. Uh, the second paradigm is about cooperation, and it was the 60s, Theory X, Theory Y, McGregor, MBO, Drucker, you know, about people collaborating and working together. But by the 90s and 2000s, particularly by the 2000s, is about co-creation. So we went from competition to cooperation to co-creation. And co-creation, The best known example is crowdsourcing, where you crowdsource something together. You produce a product or a service together. So that's the Cliff Notes. And it's also based on a survey of 4,000 people. We surveyed people to get data on what makes co-creation work. Now, you might find all of that interesting, but I would urge you to read the story. What we've done is we intertwined a story into every chapter about a gentleman named Richard, and it's a true story about an online platform that Richard was creating. And it started with competition. The story explains why. Then it went to cooperation. The story explains why. And then it went finally to co-creation. Here's why I'd recommend you read. If you read nothing else, James, read. You'll see it's a different color on the page. And it says like the story continues. Read that. We don't say this in the book. Nowhere in the book do we say this. We say it's a true story. But the online platform is BNI Connect. And Richard is my middle name.
No way. It's your story.
It's my story. We decided not to say it's my story because it was too much about one of the authors. We wanted people to just know it was a true story. So we anonymized it. But when I'm doing interviews and when I'm speaking, I say it's BNI Connect and it's me. So if you want to know the whole story to the disaster that BNI Connect was at first and became better and better and better, read that story. And here's why this is valuable for your listeners. That story is a master class in dealing with conflict. It is a master class. If you read that book and read just that story, you will get techniques that will enable you to deal with conflict between people effectively. Let me give you, you want one, maybe two strategies?
Heck yeah.
All right. Here's one. Listen till they drop. That's one of the strategies. Listen till they drop, which means in the context of this was I had a lot of people who were really, 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 really mad at me. And I went in and decided just shut up and listen and write everything down. And I let them vent for 2.5 hours. 2.5 hours. And I wrote stuff down on a flip chart. It was almost like you mentioned George Foreman. It was almost like the Foreman Ali fight, the rumble in the jungle, where
Oh, we
Ali
don't
just
talk
let.
about that one with Mr. Foreman, though.
Yeah, well, that wasn't good for Foreman, no, but
No.
you know
Yeah.
what did he call it? Ali called it the rope-a-dope strategy.
His rope-a-dope, yeah.
Just let them beat on you. And so, and I talk about that at length in there. And here's another strategy that might be interesting. When you're trying to co-create something, you have to let in barking dogs. You have to let the people who are barking, some of them, not all of them, because then it becomes real chaos. You let in some of the leaders who are barking dogs because they're going to continue to bark, but they're going to do it outside. And you're not going to know what they're barking about, and you're not going to know who they're telling. What you want is to bring them in. And you want to make them part of the process and let them bark within the context of what you're trying to create together. And there's like 20 different strategies that I talk about. And so if you want to learn how to deal with conflict in an organization, read that section of every chapter and you'll walk out. It's a masterclass in co-creation.
If you're listening, it's called The Third Paradigm. I will have a link along with our links that are normally there, so you can find an easy way to get out and grab it. I want to close today, Ivan, with we covered a lot, and I love some of the stories you told, and a couple of them I knew just from knowing you, but a couple of them I didn't know, so thank you so much for that. Is there something we didn't cover regarding networking and BNI that you would like to touch on and close us with?
Yeah, I'll close you with this. You know the oldest saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know? I don't think it's either. I don't think it's what you know or who you know. It's how well you know each other that makes a difference. You can have, I mean, I have some fantastic contacts, amazing contacts in my telephone. The question is, could I pick up the phone and call them? And would they take my call? And if I asked them for a favor, would they be willing to do me a favor? So it's not just who you know, it's how well you know them that counts. Our mutual friend, Frank DeRaffley, I just spoke to him a couple days ago. I could pick up the phone and call him. He'd take my call. If I asked him for a favor, he'd do it. That's what networking is about. It's not just who you know, it's how well you know them that makes all the difference in the world.
You just reminded me I owe him a call.
Colin, he's doing well.
Yeah, good. We both gone through some stuff that I'm aware of, and I want to reconnect with him and get on his back on his page. So thank you so much for being on. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you said yes. It was a pleasure to have you on the Marketing Perspective. For listeners today, I hope you learned something, because if you don't learn it from the man himself, you're just not going to. Ivan, thank you really from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate.
My pleasure.
I will call you next week to try to build a relationship with you.
Thank you. Good being on the show. Happy to be on the podcast anytime.
Thank you. So you've heard us today talking about the importance of networking and why it's important in your marketing plan. Well, if it didn't hammer home today, it probably never will. I hope you continue to listen and you got it. And now your eyes are open and you're going to look at things a little bit differently. The concept of giver's gain is not just a concept. It's not just a philosophy. It's a living by that life. And if you're able to do that, it does change your whole life. Because Dr. Misner said it earlier, it really is a life-changing mindset. And when I figured that out years ago, it really opened my eyes up very differently. I just want to reiterate the importance of word of mouth marketing and how it needs to be in every single marketing strategy that you have out there. If you are struggling right this second, know that you're not alone, and know that if you're doing more of the same and expecting a different result, that's a sign of insanity, right? So you have to do it a little bit differently. So either keep tuning into this show, to the Marketing Perspective. I'm about to start a live show that's a weekly Zoominar that will be called Smart Marketing that I did back during COVID. I'm going to do it again. If you haven't heard about it yet, you heard it here. More than likely, if you're on my database, you've been given an outreach and an invitation to come and partake. If you are struggling in your marketing effort, please take advantage. I am doing this for free, and I'm putting this information out there for you to grow your business. If you want to ask questions beyond what you learned today, for example, and you have a networking question, or if you have a BNI question, please reach out to us. I'm happy to put you in touch with the right people to make sure you're getting the right answer if I can't answer it myself. I stay in a marketing lane, which is Marketing Perspective purely. Remember to show the show some love if you like it. Download us. Make sure you follow us. Please say something nice about it on socials if you feel motivated to do so. I ask you, why is it so hard to get people to do something nice, but it's so easy for somebody to say something bad about a business today? Think about that for a second. I mean, I'm a PR professional for almost 40 years, and I can tell you that we are heading in the wrong direction. I personally think social media caused this spiral, but we used to be a lot more positive with one another. There's got to be a way for us to get back to being positive, to helping one another, for businesses to come together, to work together, to be stronger and to be better. So thank you again for listening to the Marketing Perspective. I will probably say this will go down in history as my favorite show because I got to speak to my new friend, Dr. Ivan Misner. And I hope you enjoyed the show as well. And we'll see you next time on the Marketing Perspective.